So on this particular algebra basics, integer arithmetic is adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, and there's really, it's pretty straightforward. It's stuff that we've done before. Thanks. Order of operations is all about PEMDAS. You maybe heard about that before, right? It's just the order in which we have to do things, or you can get the wrong answer, right? And so if you don't do it in that order, then it's kind of weird, and you could actually get, the biggest thing that we have to get down is working with our negative numbers. Things like subtracting a negative. I know we've seen this before, we've done it, but we can't practice enough because it needs to come to us quickly, because as you move forward into Algebra 1, Geometry and Algebra 2 are kind of our old ways that we've named our courses. Math 1, Math 2, and Math 3, as you go through that progression, it gets tougher and tougher. All right, so we have to have these things down. All right, so we're going to advance through these. Let me see if I can control my, I think I can. Next. Never mind. Come on. Hold on. There we go. What are integers? All right, integers are whole numbers. They're not fractions. Okay? They can be positive. They can be negative. They can be anywhere to infinity that way and infinity this way, but we're not talking about fractions when we say the word integers. But we are talking about negatives and positives. All right? Negative numbers show up all around us all the time in various ways. Like, for example, temperature is the #1 place that I think of when I think of negative numbers. I also think of my bank account often, which is not good. But it's true. Banking, there are ins and outs, like positive numbers and negative numbers, right? Often when it comes to finance, and when you add, subtract, but then there can be a surplus, and then there can be a deficit in terms of, like, hopefully not your bank account, but all right, so here's our next. Adding and subtracting negatives. Here's some different examples, right? This, 4 minus 5, means that you go past a 0 on the number line. All right, so I always think about where I start and where I end, okay? And so there are some weird situations that show up, right? This is minus a negative. Whenever you have minus a negative, that means that it turns into a positive, all right? And you're just going to add them. Because it's like taking, you're going to subtract, so you're going less, but it's like subtracting a negative number means that you're kind of thinking about going the other way even. On the number line, it's kind of weird to think about, but in like any of these situations, like minus and negative is a common one that messes with people. But right, what about this? I have a negative, but I'm going to subtract another negative. Well, it turns into this. Think of it this way instead. From this point forward, if you've ever written two symbols that are the same, like negative and negative together, or subtracting a negative, get rid of those. And so what some people do is they write, where's that thing at? Here it is. So what they often do is, I had a math teacher in 8th grade that would say, cross the line and change the sign. So instead of rewriting it, on the spot, they would just turn it into a plus plus, which is an interesting way to do it. And so a variety of different ways of thinking about this, but often this is the way I like to think about it, is visualize a number line. I don't write down a number line every time, but visualize it, think about it, and here's where I start. -6 is where I start. I'm going to add, which means go that way, right? So I go 1, 2, 3, and I add to it, which makes it go to a -3, right? Think about which way you're going. If you're at a negative and you subtract, so I'm at -6 right here, and if I go negative, if we don't have this whole jumping thing down, which I know a lot of us are like, I got it, and then you would have to go negative. Adding a negative is the same as writing it this way. -6 minus 3 equals -9. But I still, to this day, think of a number line, even in my brain, and think, okay, I'm going that way. I'm going to go more negative. This means more negative, all right? Or subtracting 3 would be going all the way to -3, all right? Here's our next slide. We only have like 5 slides, but it'll be quick here. Multiplying and dividing integers. If I have a positive times a positive, it's positive. If I have a negative times a negative, it's positive, right? If I have a positive divided by a positive, yes? Right? So if they are the same sign, then the answer will always be positive. If they're different signs, see how they're just different, doesn't matter the order, but if one's positive and one's negative, then you have to be able to turn it into a negative, all right? If they're, it doesn't matter whether you're multiplying or dividing, the same rule applies. If they're opposites, then they will turn into a negative, all right? Remember to work two numbers at once. If you have three numbers given, then do two of them, and then the next one. Do the answer with the next one. So that kind of brings us into our order of operations. Here, this is one way I remember it. Positive times a positive, smiley, so positive and happy. Right? And then negatives times a negative is a positive. That's kind of weird too. I don't know. Ooh, this is not going well though. This is so negative. I don't know. Yeah. All right. We have right here integers, where we add and subtract. There are some weird situations that look like this, right? And we just have to be able to work with those numbers. If your integer arithmetic is off, grab a calculator and know how to use the negative button, but honestly, that skill has to be down in order to be better at this next. So we're going to get some practice. We're going to go through it. And more importantly even is working with negatives and order of operations at the same time. All right, so negatives times a negative, if they're same, this is just a summary of the stuff we just talked about. Next, absolute value, little review. What is it? It says the distance from the 0 point, the middle, the 0. All right, so if I was to take absolute value of a negative number, it just means how far away is it from 0? How many units is it away? Like -8, absolute value, oh, it's only 8 units away. It doesn't matter if it's negative, right? So that comes up in physics a lot, actually, because if I care about my distance from here to the door, sometimes in physics, if I'm on this side of the door, it would be positive. If I'm on that side of the door, it would be negative. But do we both have the same distance? Distance would be absolute value. Now, sometimes you measure negative distances. That depends on which direction you're traveling in physics. All right. So this is pretty straightforward. Another way that it has been taught in the past is just to take your negatives and make them positive. That's all the absolute value does, is it takes the final thing that's inside those absolute value and just makes it positive. All right. We'll talk more about some reasons why we use absolute value, some applications of it and stuff. But here's an example. Ask yourself, how far is this number from 0? -4 right here? Well, it's right here. So how far is it? 1, 2, 3, 4. See how it makes it positive because it's only like that far away? Well, that one's only 3 units away. So that's 3. But ultimately what it does is it just takes every positive or negative number and just makes it positive, right? So it makes the negative value turn into a positive because it cares about the 0 location and how far away you are from it. All right. Next, order of operations, PEMDAS. Parentheses first, then exponents, multiply or divide next. This is key, from left to right. So kind of like you're reading a book. You got to go through a problem. Here's an example problem. Okay, so the very first thing I would do is my exponent. Right there. Well, we don't have any parentheses, so check your parentheses. Then your exponent, simplify it. So 2 to the third. 2 to the third is 2 times 2 times 2, which would be 8. Because 2 times 2 is 4, and then times 2 again, 8. And then I go left to right, and I do, see how there's dividing and multiplying? Well, you got to do this one first. Even though it says PEMDAS with an M first and then D, no, it doesn't matter, right? You got to do the dividing first because it's left to right. See how I'm going through this, and I do divide first and then multiply? All right, I think we get the idea a little bit, but I found this really awesome picture. I think that's the next one. that is a Dear Aunt Sally. It's actually what she looks like. Have you ever heard that please excuse my dear Aunt Sally is one way to remember PEMDAS? It's just the order in which to do things. Parentheses, right? Excuse, E. So sometimes people on their top of their paper like to write down PEMDAS. And then there's another teacher that I've heard call it PEMODEOS or something like that. And then they put an O right in between these two right here and an O in between these two. So PEMODEOS, because it's multiply or divide, add or subtract. I don't know. If that confuses you, don't worry about it. But please excuse my dear Aunt Sally is a way to remember it. All right, here's an example. Okay, so very first thing I would do is tackle my parentheses. Okay, inside the parentheses, do the arithmetic. So inside there, you need to do the exponent first, since that's another first thing. So do all the stuff in the parentheses in order. You're going to get the wrong answer if you don't do it exactly the way I'm showing you right now, which I know you've seen before. But let's make sure that we do attention to details. If you are working through a problem probably 3 months from now and you're not paying attention to every single detail, you're going to get it wrong, all right? Because the details in math class really matter, all right? So right here I get, this is 4 times 4, which is 16. And then I simplify that to 18, okay? Check, parentheses are done. Sometimes I like to even mentally check it off. You don't have to write down PEMDAS on your paper necessarily, but check it off, okay? Exponents are next. So exponents, well, there were exponents inside the parentheses, which we did, but there are no exponents in the rest of it. So now, since there are none, I check that off. Now I multiply or divide.